This is Jacques Bolivar, certified financial planner, reviewing a educational workshop that was done with David Latterman, a client and director of political science research at USF, on November 28th, 2012. This presentation is a fiscal cliff notes. We'll briefly describe the situation, potential paths forward, and possible compromise outcomes. The first topic is media on the issue. We traditionally view media as the fourth leg in the check and balance of the table of politics. However, in this case, media is playing more a role, which looks like the tech 2000K situation where the media portrayed something as a disastrous potential outcome, and the business of media to draw us to watch in and view and sell ad dollars promoted us to be fearful and concerned about an issue that was really worth listening and tuning into, but not being fearful about. And for that reason, we wanted to put together something that provides more education and seeks out truth rather than just sensationalizes an issue. We hope that we'll be able in this video clip to share more information that'll provide you a clear understanding of what to do next and how to think about the issue. We really see the first time that we discuss the issue of fiscal cliff was in the public conversation when Ben Bernanke said it during a Congressional Budget Committee meeting and described a large, massive fiscal cliff of large spending cuts and tax increases to occur and begin on January 1st, 2013. If we take a timeline of events, we'd have to go back to the early part of the decade in 2000 when we had the Bush tax cuts. And these cuts were in an environment of GDP growth and budget surplus. But since that time, we've had two wars, bailouts as a result of the Great Recession, and a need to address $16 trillion now of total debt. And for that reason, we have a need to talk about budget and spending with government and come up with solutions that increase taxes and cut spending. When we go to the next part of the timeline in 2011 in the summer, we think of the political gridlock that we had and the approval of a debt ceiling. Even though the efforts between President Obama and Speaker of the House Boehner didn't come to a positive conclusion at that early stage in August 2011, they agreed to $8 billion in tax increases over 10 years, and Vice President Biden and House Majority Leader Cantor were close to an agreement on similar amount of entitlement spending cuts over the next decade. If anything, those conversations helped create a framework from which they will have the negotiations now. And at that time, they were using a 2010 package of tax hikes and spending cuts put forth by Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson's budget committee that was a bipartisan effort to curb the fiscal policy that had run amok. And up and through the full first decade of the millennium, monetary policy has really been the mode of the government operating, injecting cash in the system that's been an economic recession and government overspending is reigning the day. We then have now this automatic deadline because of the tax cuts expiring and the result of the failed negotiation in the summer of 2011, something called sequestration, which is essentially across the board 5 to 9% spending cuts in defense and non-defense spending items. So we're here with this discussion. Under the current law, the scale of the tightening would be equal to something that we haven't seen since 1969, where we had $300 billion in tax and spending cuts, equivalent to 3 to 4% of GDP, and that caused a robust economy in 1968, going from 5% growth to seeing a stock market experience a 36% decline. So we have a similar type situation, and that's why we're concerned about it. But when we look at the three paths that we could have here going forward during this lame duck Congress session, One outcome is a grand bargain. Uh, it would be a big compromise. We give it a 10 to 15% chance of happening, but we ultimately would say that this is not a President Lincoln Civil War era Congress where a great bargain was struck around the abolition of slavery and providing a structure for ending the Civil War. With all the contention and the brinkmanship and negotiating to bring things to a disastrous level, we're more likely to have a second scenario, the base case, the kick the can down the road type scenario, where we avoid the fiscal cliff, but we have more of a fiscal slope. We reach tax hikes and spending cuts of 1.2 trillion and enough to avert the fiscal cliff. We think the third path of the fiscal cliff and having continued political gridlock is not desired by each, even though we give this a 20 to 25% chance of happening. We think everybody understands that the Congressional Budget Office, a forecast of a potential recession if we have this path pursued, everyone understands that it's a time for austerity and a time to avoid going into deeper gridlock. We think that the idea and concept of higher taxes is not foreign. In fact, if we look back at the past 40 years, going back as far as the Nixon era, we had top high-end tax brackets, the highest marginal rates at 70%. In the Clinton era, we had two higher tax brackets than we currently do, a 36 and a 39.6 bracket. And even during this whole time over the last 40 years, middle class income earners, those folks making between 50 and 150,000, pay 25 to 28% marginal tax rates. So to go from the current Bush era rates of 35%, it's conceivable to see that we would have higher tax rates. We think both sides agree that the middle income earners, though people earning less than 250 specifically, would continue to hopefully pay the same. But the question, what are the possible compromises that might happen next? And we here have a list of compromises that we perceive that the Democrats would have to incur and would like to make, but would probably have to experience. The biggest one would be putting on the table conversations about entitlement spending for Medicare and Social Security, and in particular seeing things like home interest deduction on mortgages and the charitable deduction being phased out or reduced. We see that those types of specific items are part of a grand bargain scenario that could happen not in this lame duck session, but later in the months or years to come. And the reason we believe that to be later is we have this deadline for the fiscal cliff at the 31st, so we're probably going to have a kick the can down the road scenario. And then on the opposing side, on the Republican side, we think they're going to use their main bargaining chip as the debt ceiling, and hopefully to get the Democrats to take some of the things that they don't want to swallow on the spending cut side, but they're going to have to deal with some tax hikes, particularly for wage earners over 250, and in particular investors paying currently 15% on capital gains and dividends will more likely than not over the months and years to come pay higher rates on those types of investment income to the tune of 20 to 25%. But again, more likely to happen in the future, not in the current lame duck session. So as we move forward, we'll see where this takes us. But until then, stay tuned at jacquesbolivar.com for future updates or call us at 510-704